I don't even have like a silly comment for this one, so let's just start the video, I guess. Hey everyone, Ryan Reed here, and today, yes, we're talking about The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, the third in the Conjuring films and the eighth in the Conjuring universe as a whole. I didn't think that like a kind of okay horror movie franchise would cause so much controversy, but apparently it does. If you look up, The Conjuring anywhere on like Twitter or Instagram or anything like that, all you'll really get are people who are either saying that it's the greatest film series ever or the worst film series ever. Or there's people who are arguing over whether, the movies should be supported because Ed and Lorraine Warren were controversial figures, or people saying, shut up, I don't want to hear about Ed and Lorraine Warren, I just want to enjoy my movie. So no matter what side you land on, apparently somebody wants to yell at you about these movies. And I don't get it. Now I will be the first person to say that I have not seen every Conjuring movie in the Conjuring universe. I've seen the first Conjuring, I've seen the second one, I've now seen The Devil Made Me Do It, the third one technically, and then I've seen the first Annabelle. And then I own Annabelle Creation, but I haven't watched it. I didn't see Annabelle Comes Home. I didn't see The Nun or The Curse of La Llorona. So I haven't seen them all, obviously, but I will say that from the ones I have seen and from what I've heard from people who have seen them, they're okay, I guess. Okay, before I jump into it, here's the thing. If you are somebody who is angry over talking about the Warrens as actual people versus how they're represented in the movie, if it bugs you that somebody wants to kind of like talk about that and you're just like, I just want to watch the movie, I totally get that, I respect that. But for me, the only way I can really talk about these films is to kind of talk about the Warrens a little bit as people, and kind of how their positive and negative effects on like ghost hunting and the paranormal research and things like that, to get into the movie. So if that bugs you, I'm sorry, but that's just something I have to talk about because otherwise I can't jump into the movie. Also, there will be some spoilers for this movie and the other films in the franchise, so if you want to go in and not know anything, definitely check out the movie before you come back to this video. Now, the first Conjuring film I saw when it came out, and I thought it was totally fine. I like James Wan as a director. I think the problem he has is that every movie he's made kind of past Saw, with a few exceptions. Obviously, he directed like Aquaman and one of the Fast and Furious movies, and he directed one probably my favorite of his entire filmography, which is a criminally underrated movie called Death Sentence. If you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend it. It's not a horror movie, but it is an incredibly compelling movie, and it's worth a watch. That being said, I think the problem with James Wan is that he's great at building atmosphere and tension and character development, but when it comes to the actual scares, he relies very heavily on jump scares, which I don't really remember in Dead Silence, the film they made kind of after Saw, him and Lee Wanell, which is a film, again, another really underrated film that's now starting to get a cult following, which I really appreciate. And I do remember some jump scares in that, but it was much more about the dread and the atmosphere, I feel like, than what his later films kind of became. Insidious is a film franchise I've never really enjoyed for that reason. They rely very heavily on the cheap jump scare. And what I mean by cheap jump scare is not every jump scare is cheap. The way I describe it is that if the jump scare is caused by an audio cue that is not part of the environment that the movie is taking place in, it's not a good jump scare. It's basically there because they don't have a true scare to make the audience terrified. Now, if a jump scare is well earned and you build a lot of tension and it's something that happens within the movie, great. There's some great ones in my old video in 1408 on Fright Films. I talked about some of the great jump scares in that. There's a few decent ones in this film, and Devil Made Me Do It. Conjuring, Devil Made Me Do It. When the movie suddenly goes into territory where, well, we need a scare here, something goes boo and pops out, and all of a sudden there's a loud sound cue or a boom or a music sting or whatever, something like that, it's cheap. It's not earned. You're trying to make your audience jump, but there's nothing within the movie that has earned that. And so I classify those as cheap jump scares. Just wanted to clarify that because I'm going to talk a lot about it in this review. But the first Conjuring, I think, is a really solid film that I think is better than Insidious. I think James Wan directed directed The Conjuring after Insidious, if I remember correctly. And Insidious, to me, was a lot of tension, a lot of build-up, and then all the scares sucked. To be quite frank, that's kind of how I felt about it, because they're all cheap jump scares. The Conjuring did something smart, which is they told an interesting story with great, interesting family characters, as well as bringing the Warrens in, which, for the purpose of the movie, they are interesting within the movie. And then it does have jump scares, but it also earns a lot of its scares too, so I can kind of forgive the cheap jump scares a little bit more. Conjuring 2 comes out, and it does everything wrong. To me, everything that I liked about The Conjuring, I did not like about Conjuring 2. I think there's a lot of people that debate, like, is Conjuring 2 better than Conjuring 1? In my opinion, no. It's not even anywhere close. The Conjuring 2 is so weak compared to Conjuring 1 because it's reliant on cheap jump scares, on crazy over-the-top effects, all kinds of stuff, and it just completely negates everything that makes the first movie good, in my opinion. Now, James Wan did not direct this new one. Conjuring Devil Made Me do it. And again, the only other one I've ever seen is Annabelle, the first Annabelle, which I thought was fine. I thought it was okay. I didn't hate it like everybody else did. I didn't love it. But from everything I've heard about the other films, again, not judging them because I haven't seen them, but I've heard that it's a lot of the same type of cheap jump scare. And that's incredibly frustrating for a lot of reasons. But my main problem with these movies, on top of that, honestly, is the fact that they're tied so heavily with Ed and Lorraine Warren, who, if you don't know who Ed and Lorraine Warren were, which if you're watching the Conjuring films, you should probably kind of have an idea, but basically in the 70s and the 80s, they were paranormal experts. They were demonologists, basically. And they went in, they explored cases of the unknown, and they a lot of the stories that did happen to some degree, like this court case that happens in The Devil Made Me Do It, did actually happen. The problem with Ed and Lorraine Warren is that, yes, for a lot of people interested in the paranormal investigators, demonologists, if you want to, but a lot of people interested in that type of stuff now, that field now. The problem is that Ed and Lorraine Warren, they were a great gateway into that sort of stuff for a lot of people, because they were at that time, they were one of the few people who really talked about it and wrote books about their experiences. So a lot of people now that you're watching were probably influenced by Ed and Lorraine Warren. But Ed and Lorraine Warren, anytime they encountered anything paranormal, it was a demon. So the problem is that where kind of paranormal investigation is now, which, by the way, if you've never checked out like my short audio show I did a few episodes of called The Paranormal Tapes or things like that, I consider myself a skeptical believer. In other words, I do believe that there is the possibility of something out there, ghosts or things like that, some otherworldly forces. Who knows? It could be out there. But I'm also not going to immediately jump to, it was a ghost, it was a monster, it was a demon, it was a cryptid, whatever. I'm not going to jump to that immediately if I can try and debunk it. And, 9 times out of 10 you can. So when Ed and Lorraine Warren were doing a lot of their cases, everything was a demon. Well, this person might have, maybe in the 70s, they didn't realize, people struggle from mental illness, or people struggle, with depression, or things like that. Nope, it's a demon. They need an exorcism. Nope, it's a demon. Nope, it's Satan. Nope, it's this. Nope, it's that. And that does a great disservice to not only paranormal investigation to some degree, but also to kind of their reputation. They would make claims about, we got this amazing evidence and we filmed this ghost and we did this, but they wouldn't show it to people. They would show it to a select few privately, but they would never actually show people. And so there's really no evidence to support all the claims Ed and Lorraine Warren made. So why am I talking about all this? Talking about all this because when you base a entire film franchise on these people, and most of the films glorify them and completely make stuff up, but still say based on a true story, that's a problem. Now, the smart way to do this would be the way that they did with The Exorcist. When William Peter Blatty and Will Friedkin, I believe, got together and made that book. First, Blatty wrote the book, and then they made the film. when they did that, basically the way that they did that was, oh, there is a case that we've studied based on this possible exorcism that happened, this possession that happened. But we're going to take that, we're going to run with it and change things and modify things, change people's names, change who they were, and basically we're going to tell a kind of fictionalized story based on this other stuff. Even the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is, I was always said, based on a true story, was really just Tobe Hooper having this one moment at a store where he saw a chainsaw when he was in line and thought, well, what if I picked up that chainsaw to get further ahead in line? And then on top of that, you mix in the true story of Ed Gein and you get Leatherface. So it's based on a true story, but it's a completely fabricated thing. And that to me is the smarter way to do that. The only stories that are real from the Conjuring universe, all 8 films, the only ones that are real in quotes, that are based on events that happened is The Conjuring 2, and 1/3 of The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. The rest of it is completely made up. It's very conflicting. It's very problematic, in my opinion. So why do I bring this all up? Why am I trying to rain on people's parade? I'm not. If you like the Conjuring films, there's nothing wrong with that. That's okay. If you like reading up on Ed and Lorraine Warren's books and stuff, that's okay. I don't care. But the problem is, you're taking something that's based on true events, you're blowing them way out of proportion, and instead of giving us a true look at these people, who these people were, which could be interesting, maybe we look at one of the Warrens' cases on a more vague level, from a distance a little bit, and it might be more interesting. And as these films have gone on, they've gotten crazier and crazier and crazier. It's been a while since I've watched the first Conjuring, but what I remember is a fairly grounded movie with some good scares that gets a little crazy at the end. It gets a little bonkers, and by that time you're on the roller coaster ride of the movie, and so that's okay. But Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, opens up with an exorcism where a kid is contorting himself, and windows and plates are exploding, and all this crazy stuff is happening. And then at the very end of the movie, they play the actual audio of the exorcism that was based on. And it's the most mundane sounding thing. There isn't all this crazy stuff there. So you're taking a lot of extreme liberties in a movie like this. And that's frustrating. That's incredibly frustrating. Now, if they'd even changed their names, if it was Bob and, Lois Warden, and it was oh, we're basing our events on this, but we're kind of making our own characters, great, then I'd be all on board for this film series. But taking real people and being they once did an exorcism, and here's the movie of it, and then you watch it and you go, and it's so incredibly frustrating. On top of that, The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It can say based on a true story. The only parts that are actually based on a true story is the beginning and the end. The entire middle section where they're trying to solve another case, and then there's, this witch who's doing a curse on people and stuff, all made up, all completely fake, not true in the slightest. And that's frustrating because you're blatantly telling your audience that this is based on a true story, and it's not. And that's so infuriating. And normally I can take based on a true story with a little bit of a grain of salt. And I can go, yeah, it's probably based on a true story, like Texas Chainsaw is based on a true story. But you're using real people's names, and you're putting it out there, and you're saying, Ed and Lorraine Warren, yeah, they fought demons and a witch who contorted herself and broke and caused curses, and they, saw all these crazy visions and stuff, and that's so frustrating and exploitive, and I hate it. I really hate it. It drives me so crazy. Okay. Now that I've got that out of the way, even just looking at The Devil Made Me Do It as a film by itself, it's not a very good movie. Taking the Warrens out of it, it's not a very good movie. It's really poorly done. In an hour and 51-minute movie, which you're give or take about 10 minutes for credits, I counted 11 cheap jump scares, and that was me kind of being generous with certain ones where I'm that could be a jump scare, but I'm just gonna write it off. Or when Lorraine has crazy flashes of like images. It's like, I'm gonna write that off and say they weren't trying to scare the audience, but them including a loud noise and a flash of something could be, but excluding all of that stuff, I still counted 11 cheap jump scares in a movie that's running time is like an hour 41 if you take out credits. Maybe a few minutes more, maybe less, but like that's roughly it. That's crazy. Then you've got like a handful of like real atmospheric moments and scares. And then on top of that, they have other scares that are just badly done. There's a moment early on where the main guy who eventually gets possessed, I don't remember anybody else's name because the movie doesn't care to know anybody else's name, but he's like sitting there and you see his point of view in a dark hallway, and all of a sudden this creature goes blah, blah, and comes running out of the hall and like to scare him. Wouldn't it have been so much better if he's sitting there and it's quiet and you slowly see something creep out of the shadows and you can't quite see what it is and it's unsettling? Wouldn't that have been scary? No. Instead what we've got is a bad haunted house where somebody goes blah, 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 and goes running at you. It's so infuriating. I can't. This is what people want to see. These are the horror movies that people want to see. I don't get it. And you know what? Again, to preface this, if you like the Conjuring films, that's fine. I'm not saying that, there's anything wrong with that. Art is subjective. Art is subjective. I'm going to say that again because I always say it, but I want to make it very clear on this one because I'm very passionate in this particular review. Art is subjective. Comedy is subjective. Horror is subjective. So if the Conjuring films scare you or hit a chord with you, great. I'm glad you had a good time with the movie. But to me, I think it's really poorly put together, and unfortunately, these films have done so well that they have influenced how movies are made, how horror movies are made. They've influenced how big budget studios make horror movies. Warner Brothers put this movie out. Warner Brothers is the same studio that in the 70s put out The Exorcist, one of the greatest horror movies of all time. That doesn't really have jump scares. It's got one, when a candle goes, and everyone goes, ah! The rest of the film, all the tension, all the atmosphere, all the dread, all the horror, all the stuff that happens in The Exorcist, and I'm comparing it to The Exorcist because The Exorcist is also a possession movie. All of that stuff is not present in this movie. It's gone. It doesn't exist. So the problem is these movies are influencing how movies get made because people go, that's a horror movie. The Exorcist tells a well thought out, interesting, just well-grounded story that even if you're not religious and you don't believe in exactly what's happening, it can still get under your skin. It's better than something going and jumping out of the shadows. I don't get it. And some people out there might be like, oh, it's not fair to compare these movies to The Exorcist. The movie, Conjuring the Devil Made Me Do It, compares itself to The Exorcist when there's an establishing shot of the house and the priest walks up and it looks exactly like the Exorcist poster and the famous shot of the priest walking up to the house in The Exorcist. So the movie is making that direct comparison, so I should be able to too. Now, look, there are some good things in this movie, I will say. Now, the direction is fairly good. I think the director got decent. Again, this one is not directed by James Wan. I wanted to, if I didn't say that already. It's directed by the same guy that did La Llorona. He's getting good performances out of his actors. I think there's some good cinematography when he allows atmosphere and dread to build. There is some of that there. There's a decent scene where you get some kind of like light laughs out of Lorraine Warren talking to a detective when they're in a car, and that scene kind of works. It brings some levity to the film. On top of that, there's a pretty creepy scene in a morgue that works until the very final moment of it when a body hits a table and it makes a cling, like cartoon sound effect, and I even wrote down, I was like, is that supposed to be funny? Like, I'm not sure if that sound effect is supposed to be funny. But it was, so, the one thing about the Conjuring films I can say, besides the fact that the first film is a pretty solid movie, is the fact that this is the first like horror cinematic universe we've probably really had since like the Universal Monsters, when they would all kind of meet each other, and so they were all kind of in the same universe. But beyond that, I mean, you maybe got like when Freddy and Jason did a crossover and things like that, but you don't really have like a shared universe. And so this is the first time that's really been done, and so I do have to applaud them for that. Taking little elements that are in each movie and kind of like making them bigger things. Great. That's awesome. But I just wish the movies were better. I mean, I've seen 4 of the 8 movies and I've only liked one of them, really. But they'll keep making them because they keep making money. Even during the pandemic right now, this movie has done really well at the box office, and obviously it's on HBO Max, and that's how I watched it, so I guarantee there's a ton of people watching it that way. But this movie is very frustrating. Patrick Wilson, and I'm totally blanking and I feel really bad, but the actor who plays Lorraine, they're still good in these movies. They're giving it their all, and they're really solid, and you do like them as characters, which is great. But I'd really rather see them play Ed and Lorraine in a movie that doesn't try and say like, oh, for sure, definitively, there were evil possessions. I think it'd be much more interesting to almost do like a Exorcism of Emily Rose like style movie where it's kind of like a courtroom drama and you kind of see maybe what happened. I'd like to see that with the Warrens versus kind of what they've done. Because here's the thing, whether, and I think I said this earlier, but in case I didn't, whether you believe the Warrens, whether you don't care, or whether you're somewhere in between, all of that, they are interesting people, or were interesting people. And I think interesting stories could be told about them. But I don't think turning their movies, their experiences, whether they were real or not, turning their stories into flat-out horror movies is not the way to go about it. Tell more subtle stories about them, and then maybe we'll be invested. Or maybe I'll be invested, because obviously everybody else in the world seems to love these movies for some reason. Or tell really bombastic, crazy horror movies like these films, but don't write them about Ed and Lorraine Warren. Make up characters, because then maybe I could turn off my brain a little bit more and enjoy them. But as they are, they're just frustrating. And not only on top of that, they're frustrating because of the whole backstory, the information on top of them, and they're also frustrating because as movies, they're just not particularly well made. Give me some dread, give me some atmosphere, give me some true scares. Give me something that when I go to bed, it lingers in my brain. Don't give me something that 20 minutes later I didn't even care about and I was watching something else. You know, like, give me something that sticks with me. Don't give me junk food as horror movies. Give me something I can actually sink my teeth into and is maybe kind of nutritious in a way. That's more what I want to know. And I'm not saying these films have to be artsy, okay? The 70s and 80s were filled with great horror movies that were all about making movies because they wanted to make their art, but they also wanted to make some money. But they don't have to be incredibly artsy, but they should be better than what we're given. All that being said, it's probably my most passionate review of all time. But if you want to see more reviews, like not quite like this, but me talk about other movies, check out Impromptu Reviews. It's my other movie reviews on the channel. Of course, you got all kinds of stuff. It's just off the top of my head. You've also got Fright Films, which is my horror movie analytical show where I kind of break movies down that I think are worth viewing, or sometimes not, but I try to kind of stay neutral on them. You can also check out some of my artwork videos, all kinds of stuff on the channel. So if you like this, you want to see more, please subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out. And leave a like on this video as well. Thanks, guys. I'll see you next time. Bye.